My name is Emīls Varatinskis. I'm an accessibility specialist and a QA engineer working in SDLC. My daily work is mostly dealing with accessibility. And today I'm going to talk to you about accessibility, what it is, and accessibility automation with Cypress. So yeah, our agenda. What is our agenda for today? So first off, like I said, we'll talk about what is accessibility. Following that, we will talk about why you should use automated tests for accessibility. And following that, we'll talk about issues about automating accessibility. So problems that can and can't be found using the automation test. And lastly, I will show you how to set up and start running your first automated accessibility test using Cypress and Xcore. Xcore is a tool, and Cypress uses it to test for accessibility. It's not specific to Cypress only, just a small note. But yeah, so let's get into it. And first off, what is web accessibility? So web accessibility means that websites, tools, and technologies are designed and developed so that people with disabilities can use them. And more specifically, people can perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with the web and contribute to the web. So in short, web accessibility means that your product or service should be accessible and available to everyone, regardless of their disabilities. But one thing to note, web accessibility also benefits people without disabilities. So, for example, people using mobile phones, smartwatches, smart TVs, etc., where they have different input modes. So they might have issues. Older people who have changing abilities due to their aging. Temporary disabilities. I've included a picture on the right side presentation. So temporary disabilities would be, for example, someone has broken their arm, can't use both arms to perform an action, etc. So next up also includes people with situational limitations. So for example, you want to see information on your phone while you're, for example, in a train, but the sun is shining directly into your phone. You can't see that good. And making your site, think about accessibility in your site, this will also benefit these people. And lastly, also it benefits people using slow internet connections or people who have limited or expensive bandwidth. And this is most common in countries that are still, I don't want to say third world countries, but less rich countries, let's say it like that. So yeah, so how is accessibility evaluated? And that's where WCAG or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines comes in. So WCAG is a document that explains how to make web content more accessible for people with disabilities. And it has 4 principles. Every principle includes main guidelines. So I will briefly talk about those. So first off, we have perceivable. That will be one of the 4 main principles. And one of the main guidelines would be text alternatives. So if you have, you're conveying information using something different than text, so for example, an image, it needs different, it needs alternatives so that users who cannot perceive these images, for example, they can still get the idea what you're trying to convey. Next up would be time-based media. And here you need to provide alternatives for time-based media, such as videos, voice recordings, etc. Next up, we have adaptable. So you need to create content that is adaptable and can be presented in different ways. So, for example, using a simpler layout instead of using a really complex one. And last for perceivable would be distinguishable. So you may need to make it easier for users to see and hear content. And that includes things like separating foreground from background. So things like color contrast. Following that, we have next principle, which is operable. And first guideline is keyboard accessible. So you need to make your content fully functional for users who are using keyboard. So everything that you can do on site using pointers, you can do the same with keyboard. Following that, we have enough time. So you need to provide users enough time to read and use content. So example here would be banners in page that are scrolling after a while. If user has no way to stop it, and maybe this is I'm on a site that's in different language than that's not my first language, I can't read it on time. So now I have to constantly jump between slides because I didn't have enough time to read it. Yeah, already sorry for pronunciation. I never know how to pronounce this. Navigable, I think. So you need to provide ways to help user navigate, find, and determine where they are. So using things like page titles, headings, etc. So users know where they are on the page. And lastly, for operable, we have input modalities. So we need to make it easier for users to operate functionality through various inputs beyond keyboard. So don't just rely on pointers to do actions. Next principle, we have understandable. So firstly, we have readable. So we need to make text content readable and understandable. Following that, we have predictable. So we need to make web pages appear and operate in predictable ways. So don't change, for example, don't change your web page design or layout from site to site. If user is on home page and goes to contact page, don't change the location of navigation links, for example. Next and last for understandable, we have input assistance. So we should provide, we should help users avoid and correct mistakes. So if we have an input field, provide users, provide descriptive placeholders or information what that input field is for, provide descriptive error messages. And the last principle, we have robust, and it has one main guideline, which is compatible. So we need to maximize compatibility with current and future user agents, including assistive technologies. So we need to make our product compatible so that it works on every browser, every device. So it's not just you're focusing so that your product works specifically really good on one device. So for example, on Windows, and on MacBook, you can do those things basically. And we will go a bit more, I will talk a bit more about these WCAG criteria in the following slides. So now I quickly want to talk about different methods for accessibility testing. So to test web accessibility, we can use browser extensions and built-in tools. Both browser extensions and built-in tools are more of a manual automated ways to test the page, because you have to open your browser, go to the page. Then, for example, Google has a built-in tool called Google Lighthouse. So now we open developer tools, we open Lighthouse, we run our tests, and only then we get the results. Same goes for browser extensions. And that's where we have end-to-end tests and unit tests. So these good thing about automating accessibility is we can include these tests in your already existing functional tests, for example. So whenever you're running your functional or regression or whatever tests, accessibility can also be checked at the same time. And yeah, regarding browser extensions or built-in tools, DevTools also have a Chrome extension. I use that from time to time. And lately I found that Firefox accessibility tool is really good for manually testing. It's mostly for manually testing, but I use it quite often because I can quickly focus on specific elements and find information about them. One downside of these tools is that I still mostly double check almost everything that they provide information to me because they can provide false positives. So why should you automate accessibility tests? So first off, you can catch errors early on in your system development lifecycle, allowing you to learn from these issues. Maybe you missed something and you can quickly find this in just after running your first test. And second point would be that you can find errors that you might not have been aware of. So maybe this is the first time you're hearing about accessibility, or you have heard about it and just haven't paid much attention, so you're not really familiar with it. Then by getting these, by running these tests and seeing the issues that arise, you can learn from them. And hopefully, going further, developing, you can take these issues into account and can continue developing with accessibility in mind. So, yeah. And yeah, issues with catching issues later on in the system development lifecycle. So the later on in system development lifecycle, the tests are added, the more possibly more issues there are to fix. If issues are found early on, you can, like I said previously, you can take these issues into account, continue developing with these issues already in mind, and hopefully not make them again. And you will have way less issues at the end of your production, because it's way easier to run these tests, check for accessibility at the start of your project. When you have, for example, 10 accessibility issues, you can fix them and continue developing with this already in mind, rather than you have already probably maybe at the end of your development lifecycle. Now you run your tests and you have 200 issues. So now it's going to take way more time from something that could have been avoided early on. So yeah, don't make an accessibility an afterthought. It's best to always add it from the start, so you can always test for it, always remind yourself, about these things. Of course, it's not the end. You're going to add it later on in the system development lifecycle. But like I said, you're probably going to have way more issues than you would have. So, for example, from my experience, I was testing a site that's a huge site with huge functionalities, and they had an issue with dialogues. So whenever I opened dialogues, keyboard focus would stay on the button that opened these dialogues. It wouldn't move to the dialogue. So now I have to go through the whole page, then the focus moves inside dialogue. Next issue would be it's not contained inside this dialogue. So I can, once again, I can navigate outside of it. And they had this issue at the very beginning when they weren't thinking about accessibility. And now, instead of fixing the first dialogue that they made, they kept reusing it in all over their page. So now, instead of fixing one dialogue and taking this accessibility into account and continue developing it by it being accessible, now they have hundreds of dialogues that need to be fixed. So, yeah. And yeah, about limitations of automating accessibility. So first off, we have limited coverage. Automated tools and the same automated testing I'm going to show, it can test against all the WCAG criteria. Industry norm is, I'd say about 30% that can be automated, and the rest has to be double checked. And still the biggest part of accessibility testing is still manual testing, but reliably you can find around, I'd say 30%. It's somewhere around industry standard. Next up would be false positives. It's not really common with X-Core, but it happens every once in a while. Recently, I had an experience where I was also running a test for a site, and it gave me back some 30 image issues that images don't have alternative text. But when I searched for these images and to make sure that they really need it, they were inside buttons and those images couldn't be focused. So it saw that there's images, it saw that they don't have alternative text, but user can never land on these images. So they're not necessary there. So that's something to keep in mind about these tests. And lastly, they won't make your site accessible. So like I said at the first point, only about 30% of issues can be found using automated tests, and the rest has to be tested manually. For accessibility testing, sadly, manual testing is a necessity rather than good to have. And yeah, another thing I want to add, recently had an experience. I was testing a site, and before starting to test it, I wanted to see what tools could show me. And they showed me some minor issue, one or two minor issues. So if you just look at this tool, you're thinking, great, this site is fully accessible. It's just some minor issues, they can be fixed in 10 minutes. In actuality, the site was one of the most inaccessible sites I've ever seen. You could focus on a couple of using keyboard, I could focus only on a couple of elements on the whole page instead of in one specific area only. The rest of the site was inaccessible. Keyboard focus wasn't visible at all. So without keyboard focus is the same as trying to navigate the site with your cursor missing. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind that automated tests for accessibility is not end all be all. Right. WCAG recommendations and automation with Xcore. So here I have a table with 30 A-level WCAG criteria. There's 3 levels, A level being the very minimum that products has to abide by. Standard for industry standard is usually AA level, and the AAA level is a very specific level, very specific criteria. And here I've used colors to indicate yellow color being for criteria that can be somewhat automated, that are somewhat automated using Xcore. And with red colors, I've colored recommendations that are not automated and need to be tested manually. So in the next slides, I'll talk a bit about a few of these recommendations and explain what they are and what are the issues where you can and can't automate them. So first off would be the yellow colored one, so semi-automatable recommendations. So first off, we have language of page. So language of page asks that correct language tag is used so that assistive technologies know which language the content is presented in. So just use correct language tag, right, for your site. Issue here is it only searches for the language tag. It doesn't search if it's the correct one. So if you have a page in Lithuanian, but you have set your language tag to English, it won't throw an error. It will say everything's good. It has a language tag. Next up, we have non-text content. And like I said, that, for example, would be images. And images, it can check if images have alternative text. It can check if it's meaningful. If for image I enter alt text image, it will pass because it has alternative text. Next up would be info and relationship. So information, structure, and relationship conveyed to presentation can be programmatically determined or is available in text. So issues here would be, for example, we have a table and we have these table headers. So when user is using assistive technology such as screen reader, if I focus on the date, it will also read the table header so that I know which information I'm on. But in this case, all of these, the table headers are marked as data cells. So user is not informed. So that's about info and relationship. Next up is use of color. So you shouldn't rely just on color alone to convey information, indicating an action, prompting a response, or distinguishing a visual element. So as an example would be sign up form. Added a picture and we can see that they are underlined in red. They have text to please enter the information necessary, and they also have an icon so that user is completely aware of what's going on. If it had only turned red, that might not be enough for users. And that would be a violation of this recommendation. Next up, we have keyboard and no keyboard trap. So as I said previously about keyboard, the site should be accessible for users using keyboard navigation. So everything that you can navigate, access using your mouse pointer, you can do the same with keyboard. And no keyboard trap, as that user does not get stuck on an element using keyboard. So for example, on an input field, user presses tab key to move forward. Instead, it's the inputs a space in the input field, and now user can't move forward or back because it will just keep inserting spaces. Next up would be link purpose in context. So each link can be determined by the link text alone or from the text together with its programmatically determined link context. So as an example we have here, so we have a paragraph which has a link inside of it. From the link text alone, you could probably understand what this is about. But if, for example, mostly in news sites and other pages, there's read more links, they have to be understandable together with the context of the link, the context around it. And same issue here is that it can find the link, it can find what its text is, but it can't tell if it's meaningful, if the context for it is meaningful. Labels or instructions. So labels or instructions are provided when content requires user input. So for example, name and code. Once again, it can check if input fields have these labels or instructions. It can check if it's meaningful. As an example, here is a name input field. Under it is code. It will pass because it has a label, it has instructions, but the user might not understand what the code is. And lastly, name, role, and value. So it has that name, role, name and role can be programmatically determined for interface components. And state properties and values that can be set by the user can be programmatically set. So here it's just using correct markups, correct information, so that when user navigates on a button with a screen reader, for example, user is informed that user is on a button. So its role is the button. It reads its name, so register, for example, and everything that user needs to understand what is going on with this element. And next up, recommendations that are not automatable. So first off, we have focus order. So focusable components need to receive focus in an order that preserves meaning and operability. Added a picture, we have focus order that just jumps around the elements. It's not, it doesn't start from the top left side, it just jumps around. Specifically on Cypress, you can't even test for keyboard focus because Cypress doesn't support that. Next up, we have timing adjustable. So time limits set by the content. So like I said, that user can pause or extend information. Example here would be, for example, banking applications that after a while of inactivity, user will be logged out. I'm not sure if there's even a good reason to use automation for something like that, because do you want to wait 5 or 10 minutes with your test just to see receive this screen? So yeah. Next up would be pointer cancellation. So this is handled by event handlers. So yeah, pointer cancellation, what it is, when user presses down on the mouse, the action shouldn't be performed. The action should be performed when user has released it. So yeah, it's handled by event handlers, and that's not something that Xcore can automate. Next up, on focus and on input. So when an element receives a focus, it doesn't initiate a change of context. So when I focus on button next, it doesn't automatically select it. And on input, same as for on focus. But now user has input information in the field. So for example, I need to provide my phone number for registering. As soon as I put it in, it registers me without me allowing me to double check everything. So that would be about accessibility, WCAG, and its criteria, a few of those criteria. And next up, let's get into it and set up Cypress with our Xcore. So setup for Cypress and Xcore is actually really easy. All we need is 4 lines, and we can already run our first accessibility test. So let me open up my code editor. So as you can see, I have a completely empty project. And first off, what we need to do, I'll probably increase the size so it's easier to see. So we will install, first I will install Cypress. Then we need Cypress X. And we need Xcore. So yeah, Cypress, we install Cypress X, and we install Xcore. So Cypress X, it's like a wrapper for Xcore for Cypress, so that it can be used by Cypress. Okay, so after we have installed everything, we will start up, just start up Cypress for the first time. So we get our, so we can set up our configuration files. So continue, and keep changing this. And I will just create a new spec file once it completely sets up. As a first time setup, yeah, I guess this happens sometimes. So we already have, yeah, well, it's creating your, So let's create our spec file and let's call it accessibility. And great. So we have already our first spec file. Let me close Cypress. So first thing we need to do is we need to import Cypress, Cypress X into our end-to-end file. So let's import Cypress X, save it. So yeah, we imported in support end-to-end file, and now we can start testing for accessibility. So yeah, what I will do first, so we can start writing our test case. First up, let's describe it. So we have accessibility test, and I will add a before each, so I don't have to visiting the site each time. So before each Cypress visit, and I had a site. So the site I'm gonna use is Chrome's Chrome's developer site for Lighthouse. So, and the first thing we need, we need, of course, Cypress visit. So we're visiting a site. After that, we need to inject our Xcore. but that has to happen after we have visited our site. So I will just add it before each, in our before each, because we will always test it. So Cypress inject X, and we can write our test case. So it should have no violations, no accessibility violations. Yeah, that looks better. Right. Good. And yeah, and how do we test for accessibility? Cypress check accessibility. And that's it. So, like I said, all we did was we used one line of code to install Cypress X and Xcore. We added Cypress X to our end-to-end file. Then we just injected X after visiting our site, and then we check for accessibility. So let's see how that goes. So we take our end-to-end test, start end-to-end testing, and let's run our test. And that's it. And our first accessibility test is ran. And as we can see, errors look just like any other Cypress errors. And yeah, we have 6 accessibility violations in this case. So what can we do? So for example, let's say we want to see these area hidden focus, because there's 14 of them. So if I click on it, it's gonna print information to console about these issues. So if I open up the console, let me make it bigger. Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of information. First off, it shows us impact of this issue. So it's a serious issue that serious issues are usually for things that partially or fully prevent users from accessing or interacting with content or features. So yeah, after that we have tags. So you know that first up here we have WCAG 2A. So it's an issue of WCAG 2.0 A level. Next up, WCAG 412. So that's WCAG 4.1.2, name, role, and value. And then some other tags for it. So you have description, and it describes what the issue is. So we need to ensure area hidden elements are not focusable, nor contain focusable elements. We can expand our nodes, see where the issue is. Failures. We have failure summary. We have HTML of where the issue is, impact of it, and the target, so we can find it. And maybe, yeah, maybe you haven't heard about accessibility. You're not sure what's going on. What does it want from you? They also have a help URL. So if I click on it, it will take us to DEC University, who are the creators of the Xcore. It will take us to the site, and we have rule ID, rule set, or impact, and how to fix the problem. So even in this case, we also have code examples on how to fix this and what are the issues. It also explains why this matters, why it should be fixed, why it should be in that way, what are the issues. And then the descriptions, algorithms, and other resources around these things. So, yeah. And yeah, if we, let me quickly, I can also, okay. Yeah, if we look at the code, what the issue is, so we're focused on the heading, which has tab index -1, so that users couldn't focus on the user keyboard. But it's a heading, users can't focus on it anyway. And under it, they have a they have a link that's visually before it, but in code it's under it. So user can still focus on this link. So yeah. Same issue. We have color contrast issues, link names, so scrollable regions, all of these things. We can click on them. We can open our console and see all of these issues regarding them, if we're not familiar with them. And nice thing about type score is it can be, you can set specific criteria you want or don't want to check. So for example, this is the first time for your project that you're testing for accessibility. So you never took it into account. So what you're going to do is you're going to run this test. And for example, you have 300 issues. It's going to take you a long time to sift through them. We need to start with the critical issues, right? So that can be easily done. So we write a new test. Let me write it as the only test. So only critical accessibility issues. So we do the same. We write Cypress check accessibility. And as we can see, we have multiple options. So first off, we can also select a specific, we can select context. So if we don't want to check the whole page, we can select maybe check only the heading, maybe open up a dialog, check that. That's we would write it just here as the first option for it. But we don't want that right now, so we write null. Next up, here we can select specific rules, select specific options, rules. So yeah, here we can write our impacts that we want to find. So we'll write included impact. And here in an array, we will, whoops, I forgot these. Yeah, so we want only to find serious issues. So I saved it, it ran again, and now instead of 6 issues, we have 4. So hidden focus, contrast, link name, and the region. So now instead of 6 issues, we have these. And yeah, it's getting late. So another thing I want to show, maybe for example, color contrast is, I think, one of the most common issues. So maybe you were already thinking about redesigning your page. You're in design stages that's going to come out sometime soon. So you don't want these issues to pop up every single time you're running the tests. So we can ignore these, issues. So let me write a test about that. So ignore color contrast issues. So the same, Cypress check accessibility. Here, again, null, because we don't want any specific thing. And rules that we're going to follow. And here we need color contrast. So it's the same as it was written in our report issue. Oops, just need this. So we have color contrast, and we need to set it from enabled. It needs to set enabled to false, so that it's disabled. So if we, I didn't write only. So, but yeah, as we can see, in the first test, we had 6 issues, including color contrast. And previous, we also had color contrast because we only tested serious issues. And in the last test, we have 5 issues because we skipped color contrast. Probably best not to skip issues that all the time, but if it's something that you're working on and you don't want your test to fail, it's completely fine. And we'll quickly add, before moving on, I will quickly also show that if, for example, don't fail tests. If, for example, you're adding these to your functional tests, you don't want these accessibility issues to cancel your tests before they can be run. So what we need to do here is I explained the first two options for check accessibility. And first up, we have the context. We don't need that. Next up, the specific options. We don't need this for now. Now we have violation callbacks, which does what it sounds like. It allows us to define a callback that receives the violation for a custom side effect. So maybe you want a custom output to terminal for whatever reason. And so we also don't want this. And lastly, we have escape failures option so that we can, so we can escape failures option. What it will allow us to do is not fail our test cases if we have failed them. So if we have accessibility issues, so we set that to true. And we can see it still found issues, but the test didn't fail. The test can keep on going. So we tested the accessibility and it didn't fail. So yeah, I think most important things about this. So I just want to go over a brief summary. So yeah, like I said, accessibility tests can be implemented into your already existing tests using just 4 lines. Like I showed, you install Cypress X, you add it to your support end-to-end, you inject X, and you check for accessibility. It's that easy. It's that easy. Like I said, it's best to add accessibility tests from the very start, so that you can catch these issues early on and you can fix them and think about them when you continue developing. And lastly, only a small fraction of the recommendations can be automated. So keep that in mind. You're not going to catch all the issues just using Xcore and out of these automated tests. How would you recommend to start accessibility testing, manually or automating? I would say first off, you should start with manual testing. If you start off right away with automated tests, there's all these false positives and issues that you can't find. Although I'd say better is to use both. Use both manual and automated tests, because also, like I said, with developers who might not be aware of some issues, if you're starting out with accessibility testing, you might also not be aware of these, and you might miss a few of these issues. So a hybrid approach would probably be the best. Next up, there are some static accessibility tools, linters. Would you recommend to use it? Yes, actually, Xcore also has a linter for VS Code, and it also works somewhat fine. I haven't really developed much with it yet. I've checked it how it works, but it got the issues that I missed. So yeah, I would recommend also adding these in. Next up, from the demo, it looks like a pretty effective way to start accessibility automation. But for an unexperienced accessibility specialist, what is the most challenging for you in accessibility automation? I'm going to think about this first, just for a second. Issue. The good thing, yeah, it's really easy to set it up. It's really easy to get into it. Issue is that, like I said, you get a lot of these issues. You get these issues back with these automated tests, but you still need to double check them. Now you need to make sure that these are actual legit issues, and you need to learn front end also for this. Definitely need, because there are some issues that might, from the first look, feel like they're okay. But once you get more into it, then you start understanding these issues more deeply, and why they are issues, and what would be the outcome of these issues. Is there an accessibility certificate in ISTQB? There is not an accessibility certificate, but there is usability certificate, which includes accessibility in it. I passed it, I think, last year, and yeah, I think at least like a third of it was, or maybe like half, was intertwined with accessibility. So if you're interested in accessibility, it has the usability certificate. Oh yeah, there was in a comment already, but yeah, usability, user experience, accessibility, it all goes hand in hand. So usability, this ISTQB certificate is also really useful. There are also some things that I still, every once in a while, I will see something and I'm like, oh yeah, I saw that in ISTQB, in the usability test certificate. So yeah. Are there any alternatives for the Xcore? Do we have something else than Xcore in market? Is it Cypress related only? No, it's not Cypress related only. The Cypress, like I said, we have the Xcore itself, and we have the Cypress X, which is a wrapper, so that you can use it in Cypress. It also works on Selenium. It works on WebDrive. It works with all the most common automated tools. So yeah, that's not an issue. About alternatives for Xcore, there are alternatives, but main issue is that they all use Xcore. Xcore is like the number one for like the basis for these automated tests. In their GitHub page, they have even added that Google's own Lighthouse, Microsoft's, what was it, Accessibility Insights, I think, that they also include some part of Xcore in them. So yeah, regarding automated accessibility tests, Xcore is currently number one. Next one. What is the best practice? Should automated accessibility tests be separated and categorized as accessibility tests? Or should they be part of functional end-to-end testing? Reread the question. I've lost my train of thought. Best practice. Should automated categorize tests? I'd say it really depends on the project. It depends on what you're doing, what changes you're making, what are your goals. Yeah, it's very, very project specific, but it's best to add them separate, so you can separate your actual functional or regression tests and separate them from accessibility tests, so you can deal with each separately. Is it getting a common practice and even an opportunity for people who actually have disabilities to start a career in IT? Actually, yes. because accessibility is becoming more and more common. Also didn't include this in presentation, but starting in 2020, I want to say 2025, not completely, don't quote me on that, but I think in 2025, all the public-facing companies have to make their not content, their content, their services accessible. And that's by law, not just by them wanting that. So it's becoming more popularized in Europe. It's already been really popular in UK and USA. So now people need these people who have this experience, so they can share. It's not just theoretical, something you learned, but people with actual experience. Pretty commonly, I see people looking for people with disabilities who can join these teams, who can give their feedback about whatever product they're looking for feedback.